The Neighborhood War. Officer James Parker versus HOA President Sylvia Matthews. The crackle of static cut through the silence, followed by a calm voice on the line. 911. What's your emergency? There was a brief pause before a sharp, nasally voice pierced through. There's a dangerous trespasser in my neighborhood, the caller announced with a self-important urgency. The dispatcher's tone shifted, suddenly serious. Can you describe the suspect? Yes. He's a man, standing in my driveway. Another pause, more awkward than the first. Wait, your driveway? The caller scoffed. No, but it should be mine. For a moment, the dispatcher sat stunned. Of all the ridiculous calls they had taken over the years, this one ranked near the top. What Sylvia Matthews didn't realize was that the trespasser she was calling about wasn't some random stranger. He was Officer James Parker, an active-duty police officer, standing on his own property. James had moved into the quiet suburb of Maplewood Heights barely 3 weeks earlier. It was supposed to be peaceful, free from the rigid restrictions of a homeowners association. He had deliberately purchased a home just outside of the HOA's official boundaries. No nonsense about what color he could paint his shutters. No ridiculous policies about lawn height or mailbox dimensions. And absolutely no one breathing down his neck. At least, that's what he had thought. Sylvia Matthews, president of the Maplewood Heights HOA, had made it her personal mission to bring James home under her dominion. Though his property wasn't technically part of the HOA, Sylvia insisted it should be. And if she had anything to say about it, it would be. It started with friendly reminders. Just so you know, the HOA prefers neutral-colored mailboxes, she'd said with a stiff smile. Then came the not-so-friendly letters about his police cruiser parked in his own driveway. Official vehicles are an eyesore, she'd written, and they intimidate children. James ignored her. When he didn't respond to her letters, Sylvia escalated. First came the warnings, empty threats of fines. Then the formal violations, which had no legal standing. She even filed a bogus complaint with the city about his property line. Nothing stuck. So when Sylvia saw his cruiser parked in the driveway that morning, she decided enough was enough. If James Parker thought he was above the rules, she'd show him otherwise. She dialed 911. James was inside enjoying his second cup of coffee when his police radio squawked. Suspicious person reported on Cedar Ridge Lane. Trespassing in progress. Units en route. He arched a brow. That's his street. Setting his coffee down, he stepped out onto his porch just as 2 patrol cars rounded the corner. They pulled to a stop, lights flashing, sirens thankfully off. James watched with mild amusement as Sylvia Matthews appeared from nowhere, practically sprinting toward the officers. There he is, she barked, pointing a rigid finger directly at James. Arrest him. He's trespassing. The officers exchanged glances, then turned toward James. Recognition flashed across their faces. One of them snorted, trying and failing to suppress a laugh. Sylvia, Officer Martinez began. Are you telling us the trespasser is Officer James Parker? I don't care if he's a janitor or the mayor. Sylvia snapped. He's illegally parked, and this is private HOA property. James crossed his arms. Sylvia, he said calmly, we've been over this. My property isn't part of your HOA. It should be, she snapped. Officer Simmons rubbed his temple. Ma'am, you can't call 911 because you don't like someone parking in their own driveway. This is a crime, she insisted. Officer Martinez shook his head. No, ma'am. But calling 911 for a non-emergency? That is a crime. Sylvia blanched. James took out his phone and hit record. Don't worry, he said. We've got it all on video. False reporting. That can carry some pretty serious consequences. For a moment, Sylvia faltered. She glanced around and realized that neighbors had begun peeking out from behind their curtains. A few had their phones up, recording. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. No official vehicles overnight. It's against HOA policy. The neighborhood agreed. I didn't agree, James pointed out. You're not part of the HOA. She shot back, then froze. Exactly, James said, smiling. One of the officers chuckled. So, you admit his property isn't under your HOA? Sylvia turned beet red. This isn't over, she hissed. James took another sip of his coffee. I hope not. This is more entertaining than morning television. James figured that would be the end of it for the day. He was wrong. By mid-afternoon, his email was blowing up with HOA messages. Effective immediately, the latest memo read. No law enforcement vehicles may be parked in public view. It was signed, of course, by Sylvia Matthews. James sighed and printed out the email. Then he grabbed his badge and drove to the HOA office. Sylvia was waiting behind the desk, arms crossed. "Officer Parker," she greeted with mock politeness. "Here to comply, I hope?" James leaned against the doorway. "Sylvia, you're enforcing an illegal policy." "This is private property," she argued. "No," James corrected. "This is a public street. You have no jurisdiction." He pulled out his phone and dialed code enforcement. "Yes, I've got an HOA president trying to enforce illegal vehicle bans on public property," he said. "Could you send someone down?" Sylvia turned pale. "You wouldn't dare." "I'm a cop," James said. "I dare." 30 minutes later, Code Inspector Mike O'Donnell arrived. "Ma'am," Mike said after skimming Sylvia's email. "Are you out of your mind?" "I don't appreciate your tone," Sylvia sniffed. "I don't appreciate HOAs acting like they run the government," he retorted. "You can't ban emergency vehicles from public roads. This is private." "No, it's not. But, and attempting to enforce this nonsense is a violation of city code. That's a $5,000 fine." Sylvia gasped. "You can't." "I can. And I will." James smiled. The next morning, James found a violation notice on his windshield. "Unauthorized vehicle storage, $250 per day fine." He laughed. She really was that petty. But instead of confronting Sylvia directly, James waited. Sure enough, more HOA notices arrived. Anonymous letters followed, accusing him of making the neighborhood unsafe. Then came the petty vandalism. Garbage scattered, cracked eggshells, and a giant violation sign taped to his garage. James peeled it off, smirked at his security camera, and muttered, "Oh, Sylvia, you're making this too easy." The next tactic was fake complaints to the city, noise complaints, zoning violations, and even a claim that James was running an unlicensed business out of his home. James requested the complaint records and confirmed what he already suspected. They were all anonymous, but the handwriting perfectly matched Sylvia's. He printed everything out and waited for the next HOA meeting. The room was packed. Sylvia stood at the podium, lecturing about community standards. "Officer Parker's vehicle violates HOA guidelines," she declared. James stood up. "Actually, I'd like to address that." He handed out copies of the complaints. "These were filed anonymously," he said. "But the handwriting matches these violation notices from Sylvia." The room went silent. "You vandalized my property," James continued. "Filed false reports. Harassed a police officer." Sylvia's face went pale. "You can apologize," James said, "or we can escalate." Sylvia stammered. "This is harassment." James turned on his body cam. "Everything's on video." Neighbors murmured. Some glared. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Within a week, Sylvia Matthews was stripped of her presidency. But Sylvia wasn't done. Late one night, James heard a tow truck outside. He rushed out to find a man hooking chains to his cruiser. "Hey, I've got an order from the HOA," the driver stammered. "You got paperwork?" The driver handed him an order, signed by Sylvia. James flashed his badge. "If you tow a police cruiser, that's grand theft auto." The driver panicked. "Call Sylvia," James said. The driver put her on speaker. "I don't care if he's a cop," Sylvia barked. "Tow it." James leaned in. "Hi, Sylvia." Dead silence. "I'm recording," James added. The driver unhooked the chains and sped off. James laughed. Then he called his precinct. The next day, uniformed officers knocked on Sylvia's door. "We need to discuss an attempted vehicle theft," they said. Sylvia stammered. "We have the recording," they added. Neighbors watched as Sylvia turned red, then white. She pointed at James. "Conspiracy," she shouted. They issued her a formal charge for false reporting and unauthorized HOA actions. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her permanently. A few weeks later, James noticed a for sale sign on Sylvia's lawn. "She's moving," he asked a neighbor. "She had to," the neighbor replied. "The fines bankrupted her." James smirked. Sylvia's house was purchased by Chief David Reynolds, James' precinct commander. Reynolds ran unopposed for HOA president. His first act? Eliminating the ridiculous parking rules. "I'm making sure Sylvia is banned for life," Reynolds told James. 3 weeks later, Sylvia returned in a last-ditch effort to reclaim her power. "I filed an appeal," she shouted. "You're trespassing," Reynolds said. "Call the cops." Sylvia screamed. Reynolds raised his phone. "I am the cops." Sylvia left, defeated. The HOA voted to permanently bar Sylvia Matthews from Fairview Estates. James leaned back on his porch, sipped his coffee, and smiled. Some victories? They're worth every second of the fight.